Well, welcome back to the Growing Money with Sean Trace podcast. I've got a really awesome guest with me today. Now, would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
I'm Dr. Megan McCoy. I work at Kansas State University in the financial planning department, but I actually started my career as a family therapist and got cross-trained with financial planners on how to address the intersection between relational satisfaction and financial satisfaction as well as well-being. And so I train financial planners how to integrate counseling-like skills to focus more on clients' overall well-being instead of just the bottom line.
I love this because the there have been so many guests that I've had come on that talk about relationships and the emotions that go into money. And one of my favorites was just from what you were talking about is that you have a couple that is dealing with normal relationship stuff, just getting to know the person, really understanding who they are. But then when you have financial challenges that get introduced that, it's like putting them in a furnace, you know? And it's
Yeah.
like you try to are having a normal conversation, but if you have that heat on, it's challenging at times, and that's the positive or the negative, but there's also the positive. Like, well, what do you do when you have a sudden win extra money?
Yeah.
How are you addressing these things? So it's really interesting that you talk about that.
Yeah, I have so many things that come to mind with that. So the first one is that I once heard a quote that money is the object in which we project our deepest fears, dreams, and hopes onto. And so when we have these money conversations, we're like, oh, it's just about the numbers. No, it's about sense of power, about a sense of control, about sense of respect, about fears. And so it's all these
Yeah.
deeper issues, and we're not giving it the gravity it deserves. And then you're so right about the opposite side, that positive focus when we get more aligned with their money, we're able to create goals together and create like a better sense of what our future looks like. Like if my goals are all about, I'm going to save money for this person, I'm going to save money for this thing, instead of having these couples goals is we're going to save up for a trip to Europe to make memories in 5 years. And we're going to save up so retirement looks like this. All of a sudden your commitment with your partner goes up because not only are you thinking about your own future, but your future includes your partner. And it's hard to leave both.
That's awesome. But I hadn't heard it framed that way. And there's a couple things that I years ago studied acting. And one of the things is I got to train with probably one of the greatest teachers in my mind in Hollywood at this time, and her name's Ivana Chubbuck. And Ivana Chubbuck has this great technique, and her 12 steps to be an actor. And one of the things that she looks at is she talks a lot about goals and objectives. For her, every character has an overall objective, and it's interesting because we would think of an overall objective being, like, oh, well, so someone might say, I want to be rich. No, that's not an overall objective. Like that is something, that's a tool. That is a step towards something. Like, what do you really want? Do you want let's go into the world. I love movies and I love
Yeah.
kids movies. I love Harry Potter. All right. What did Harry Potter want? Why did he go all over and do all these things as an actor? He wanted to feel safe and he wanted to protect the people he loved. So he went to the ends of the world and did all these crazy things because his real goal was to protect people that he cared about because he couldn't protect his parents. So how is this tied in with money? Well, we all want things, and everyone will say, I want money. Well, hang on. What is it that money can do for you? Do you feel powerless? So my daughter today was talking about one of the kids at her school, and she's like, he's so annoying. He will do these things for people. He'll go and get them their cup, and then he'll bring them their toothbrush after nap time. And I said, well, why do you think he's doing that? Well, I don't know. He's so annoying. I said, well, it seems to be that he's trying to do nice things for people to get them to like him. Well, no one likes him. And I said, and that's it.
Oh,
Because no one likes him. He's doing all these nice things. And she's like, well, he's being annoying when he does it. I said, yeah, but you gotta be patient with him because it seems that he's aware that people don't like him in the class. And she got quiet for a
ugh.
second. And she was like, it clicked for her. But there's that. Our actions are actually motivated by something deeper, and money
Ugh,
plays a big part in
yeah.
that.
And I love that you were just teaching so much empathy. It's like there's this great cognitive bias that we tend to do where we assume everything that we're doing has perfect context. We did that because we were hungry, we were tired, or whatever. But we always assume the other is doing it because of their personality, right? So if I'm
Mm,
being rude, it's because I need a Snickers bar and it's been a long day. If my partner's being rude, I think he's just always a jerk, right? And so you
yeah.
were teaching that empathy to break that actor observer bias and say, hey, let's be curious. When we fight with our partner about money, maybe we just assume it's because they're materialistic. Maybe we need to unpack, maybe they need this sense of brand to feel included in their friend group, or that they feel like they couldn't have as a child and they deserve it now, or like being curious about why our partner does the money things that we may disagree with, and being more interested in the why than the outcome itself in this one particular instance.
It's interesting because when I moved to Southeast Asia and lived here, without going into politics stuff, I live in a country that was dealing with a lower level for a long time of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so you see effects of that. When I drive places, parents will rush to put their kids in front of you. Like people will rush in line, cut in line constantly because there was this survival. You look at people were trying to shove their kids onto airplanes to get them to safety. There was
Yeah.
stories about that. Now, you fast forward and you bring money into that. And when I look at the way my mother-in-law interacts with money, or my wife, you start to see these underlying things. And I can be really like, why are you doing it that way?
Yes.
But if you start to slow down and go, okay, why is this person acting this way? eh, Early on in my marriage, my mother-in-law would try to feed excessively, like force feed my daughter. And she was like, as a baby, she's like, Daddy, I'm full. And they're like, keep eating. And there was always foods and always snacks. And then it kind of like, I was like, man, she said she's okay. You don't need to give her anymore. But then one day I slowed down and I said, okay, let me think about this in the context of a person who was really poor growing up in the midst of a civil war, didn't know when there was going to be food on the table, didn't know if there was going to be work. And the absolute most important thing was making sure people were fed. If I can start looking at that with empathy, suddenly I understand why the fridge is always excessively filled with food. Things are falling out. And versus, we have these different perspectives. But again, if you aren't approaching people with empathy, if you aren't approaching yourself with
Oh,
empathy, you're going to be getting into problems. And this is for with personal finance. Like I started this podcast not because I knew a lot about personal finance. I wanted to help other people. I am that guy who is so lost and so confused. And I started this because I was like, I've got this 8-year-old kid who needs me to get my stuff together so that I can guide her on her financial journey. And so, I had to have some empathy for myself when I sat there and my guests are talking about, right, that you have, if you're, have you been fully stocking your Roth IRA, your Roth IRA and your 401k? And I'm like, I need to learn those vocabulary words, and it's like I
yeah.
had to have empathy with myself because no one taught me.
And there's so much fear because money's not talked about that, like, some people magically know everything, right? And so, like, for me,
Yeah.
I was really insecure about my knowledge, and instead of, like, just Googling it, or I just felt like it was, like, I wouldn't even know enough to Google, and it's not that at all, and I'm
Right.
like, I
Right.
I'm like a university professor, and so ChatGPT has some downfalls, but I am so happy about
I love it.
ChatGPT's possibilities around helping people be less insecure about finances. Like,
I ask it
ask it when you're
questions all the
confused. Yeah.
time. I was like, ChatGPT, can you, without judging me, answer this question for
Yes.
me? Like, what is
Yes.
this? And it's like,
Yes.
all right, Sean, you're not that stupid. I'm like, thank God. You know,
You just create like the algorithm where it always says, "No, you're doing a good job." Like, and then
I totally did. I totally did. I ChatGPT, I was like, you need to sweet talk me and make me feel safe and secure. Like I am emotionally fragile, even though I don't project that to the world. I put this tough guy thing out there. There's a lot of
Yeah.
inner
Oh,
turmoil.
yes. I can empathize with that so much because There's this great researcher who talks about how people have different underlying money scripts. And the four that they talk about the most are money vigilant, where you're very careful and
Yeah.
fastidious and cautious about your money status, where you feel like other people have to see your success in order to be successful. Like if you don't have the right watch, then people don't think you're a good enough person. And that's different than materialism, right? And then there's money worship, where you think that like if I only had a magic wand, it's the only way to get rich because rich people are different than me. So I have to gamble or I have to risk it all to be able to be rich. And then there's money avoided, which I think we both are. What's it called? In recovery of money avoidance,
Yeah.
because it's this idea that like we are
Head in the
insecure
sand.
either, yeah, either around our literacy around money or our moral beliefs around money. So for me, it kind of dissected each other where I felt like as someone who wanted to be a therapist from a little kid, I just wanted to make the world a better place. And for some reason, within culture, within my religious upbringing or whatever it was, money was like a root of evil. And so to have money would be taking away from others in my mindset. And I felt like I didn't know anything. So it was like the perfect story of like, I'm never going to make money. I'm never going to take money. I'm never going to use money. And I'm just going to live in my, yeah.
Well, you're hitting the nail on the head, and there was one guest that came on, he was like, and we get those money scripts, and you think about how early on some of this programming is putting out there, like, the rich person in,
Mm.
like Mr. Burns, say,
Yes.
"I have the money," and versus there are some really, really awesome people out there doing amazing things with their money that are
Yeah.
helping people, that are I was reading about Adam Sandler today, and it was this video, and it was talking about Adam Sandler drives. He wears T-shirts for 10 years, and they have photo proof. He wears the same T-shirts. He wears tennis shoes until they're beat up. And then someone was like, and people were like, "What? He just doesn't get it." And it's like, no. And you read about how much money he has donated to different people, different groups, different charities.
Ugh.
Powerful stuff. But
Ugh.
I'm sure
Yeah.
that you
Can
have
we
to
get into
overcome.
the research on charitable giving or
I'd
giving to
love
others?
to. Talk to me.
I am obsessed. There's this amazing researcher named Elizabeth Dunn who's done work, and I'll kind of summarize some of her research, but you should definitely check her out. But she talks about how charitable giving or giving to others, it doesn't even have to be a charitable or like a formal thing, is the most powerful way to find happiness in life.
I
So, for
love that.
instance, she went to college campuses, right, where we're broke and we don't have any money. And she went to college kids and she says, I'm gonna give you half $20 and you spend on yourself, and I'm gonna give you half $20 and you have to spend on someone else. You could buy a pizza for a friend, you buy a pitcher of beer for your best friend, whatever. You have to spend that $20 on other people, right? She did the study. Of course, the people who spent on others were happier than those who spent on themselves. Then they went out and they told those college kids beforehand, hey, we're going to give you $20. We've done this experiment all over the world, over 100 places, and always the people who gave money to others or spent on others were happier. What do you think? They're like, that was true for those guys, but for me, I'll be happier if I spend on myself. And yet again, that group was happier when they spent on others. Then they have
That's awesome.
brain science research that shows if you give people happiness, I mean, give people money, whether it's charities or someone you love, the pleasure part of your brain lights up.
It's
Then
awesome.
they find if they force you to give your money to someone else, the pleasure part of your brain lights up. Then they found if they give you money to give to someone else, your pleasure part of your brain lights up. So, like, there is
It's awesome.
uniformal proof that like spending on ourselves, it's not going to bring us the joy of spending it on someone else, whether it's buying a friend a coffee or donating to an organization that you think will make the world a better place.
That's awesome. And it rings true on so many levels, and I mean, and you think about that, some of the biggest holidays, Christmas is a giant holiday where we put together this intricate thing where we wanna gift people things, and, like, I was talking to my wife about that, because, again, my wife grew up with Christmas, but the art of the Christmas present, we have these, like, what was it? That there was this one movie or story about the woman who cut her hair, and the man
Yes.
gave the
And he
hair
gifted her
clip,
a comb.
yeah, comb, and
Yes.
then she gifted him, like, something like a tie thing, and
Oh,
he
I think it
sold
was like a watch holder and he sold
a
his
watch.
watch for the
He sold
comb.
his watch, right? Yeah, exactly. And but we would always I talked to her about there's an art to gift giving because it's such a powerful thing to be able to see and to understand what that person needs. and
Right.
wants. And so there is something so powerful to it. And I think that one of the things that I am mixed bag on some of the YouTubers right now because like some of it, like when my daughter watches it, some of them throw out stuff that's, too much. But early
Yeah.
Mr. Beast, when he started just getting money, and he did this thing where he would give away without making people play games or do challenges. He just gave away. He would walk into a store with, $10,000 and be like, whatever you want, that's 10 grand,
Yeah.
buy it. And you could see the joy that he got. You could see the joy that the people had. I remember watching videos of Shaq. Shaq is one of my favorite people because he just does so much amazing altruistic stuff. I remember seeing videos of him. He rolls up into Walmart and he's in Walmart and he looks at the guy and he's like, "Hey, all these people right here, put them on my credit card." And all their eyes are
Oh,
just like, wow, and then people are getting stuff. And Shaq invested well, and he did so well. He's got an empire of stuff that he owns, and yet he's constantly giving back because it makes him feel good. It feels
yeah.
great. The other day I was in line, and it doesn't have to be big, and I think this is a thing to remind people. It's just the simple act. I was waiting in line, and I had just had a rough day. And I don't remember even now what happened, but it wasn't a fun day. And I was filling up my gas and I had some extra money and I just was like, I don't know. I feel like paying for the person behind me. And I looked at the guy and I handed him enough money to fill up the tank of the person behind me. And then I started pulling out and he pointed to me and the lady turned and just started crying.
Oh
And
my
I
gosh.
didn't stick around. I had to get to work, so I drove off. But I just was like, in some ways, it must have been an answer to prayer or something for her in that moment that just it was the thing that she needed at that moment. And like that's the beauty of giving is and I firmly believe without getting into all the woohoo that what you put out comes back. Whether it's just that you make this world a nicer place by sharing positivity, or if there's some type of karma that flows back to you, however you want to look at it, the goodness never goes to waste, you know?
Yes. Yes. And, like, even on another level, like, there was a great Friends episode about how is there such a thing as altruism? Because it gives us so much joy. Like, everything that we do kind actually pays us back in that moment because we feel good for that moment of joy of seeing someone else's joy, of making the world a better place, of feeling also like that we have enough to give and makes us, subconsciously realize we should be grateful because we have at that moment something to give someone else because we have enough almost.
This comes back into and this is why one of my journeys to personal finance, because I was driving to work this one time and I saw a woman and her child on the side of the road, and I did not have anything to give. And they looked at me for help, and I could see this person was in need. And there was one time where a guy was driving and I didn't have anything to give, and I literally saw the man was just his shirt was torn to shreds. So I pulled over, pulled off my t-shirt and handed it to him. And like so that's kind of who I am. But like one of the reasons I wanted to do more with personal finance is because I remember some of the people in my life that were gifted with wealth, and then it wasn't gifted to them, but they were lucky enough to cultivate and had life go their way. And one of them was my uncle. Dr. Trace was everyone called him Doc Trace, and he was always helping people he could, and it was so beautiful. But without having your finances in order, you won't have anything to give. And that's the
Right.
thing that I think that, is a motivator for people out there, because there are so many people. I come from, having studied alternative medicine. I studied Chinese medicine and acupuncture. And a lot of my friends in the community are very money avoidant. And they're like, you know what? I want to help people. I don't care about money. And I
Yes.
said, but you can help people and care about money.
Yeah.
These are not two separate things.
Right. right? You can determine how much you're gonna give in advance and save for that goal and get
Yep.
the chance to acquire wealth to provide in your estate to help even more because of the compounding interest that will grow over time. Like, there's so many small and big ways we can help people by being financially healthy. But not only that, like, you'll be able to focus better at your job when you're healing people because you're not financially stressed. You'll have less conflict with the loved ones in your life and therefore be able to focus more on healing people. Like, all these other things come from having financial health pieces so tied to our overall well-being.
100%. And you have to start somewhere. When you talk to people and they come to you to talk about personal finance, where do you start?
Where do I start? Uh, this is usually I think I start at the beginning to see where their story formed. I love these things called genograms, money genograms. They're kind of like family trees where you
Nice.
kind of talk about like what were the patterns around money? Like were the youngest always the artists who were struggling with money? Like were the oldest always like so focused on finances that they didn't have any fun? What was all the women in charge of the money or had no power over the money? Like what are the dynamics in the people between each other and money? Which side of the family had wealth, which side didn't, which had conflict around money, and kind of explore. I also think oftentimes we start with what are the problems you're trying to fix instead of what are the goals you're trying to
Oh,
achieve. And so I like going with that idea of like the positive psychology rather than the scarcity mindset. I'm doing a study right now with some amazing researchers, and we were looking at how so much of happiness was tied to having goals, financial goals as a couple. And
oh,
yeah, I realized that there's been a great study by Sonia Luter who studied couples who went to see a financial planner. I'm a financial therapist, which is slightly different, but they went to see financial planners, just numbers people, help them figure out their financial situation, right? And they found that after a year of seeing a planner, all these couples were accidentally happier. And I think
yep.
that's because one of the first steps in financial planning is to create goals. And so now you have this sense of like, we're a team, we're working towards something. We understand what's important to each other, and we're trying to support each other's way of getting to that thing that's important to them. Whereas so often we start with, how can you save more money, which makes you just nitpick what other people are spending on. And again, that actor observer bias messes us up because so often we're like, oh, our partner spends too much in this area while we're overlooking what we
Yeah.
may spend too much in. And so I love
And there,
goals rather than how to cut down.
and you get that resentment, and
Yeah.
I think that that's like, what was it? What are the, is it John Gottman and his Four Horsemen?
Oh, yes. I love John Gottman. Yeah. And it is Four
Yeah.
Horsemen.
Four Horsemen. So we have, was
Yes.
it, stonewalling?
Stolen
But
Wallet. That's the first one that came to mind for me, too.
what's the,
Um,
what are they? So we have stonewalling, we have nagging, nitpicking, we
it's
have,
a criticism versus complaints. Let me see
yeah,
the
criticism versus complaint. Are you looking it up? I can tell
I'm
you mine
looking
too.
it up. Because I teach on it, so I'm embarrassed I don't remember. Contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. So,
Criticism, contempt,
criticism
defensiveness.
yeah. So criticism is instead of saying, I wish you had loaded the dishwasher, is saying, why are you so messy? It's these like
Yeah.
global descriptions. Like instead of saying, I wish you hadn't spent so much at Best Buy this week, it'd be like, I think you always are spending on your own stuff instead of what we need for a household. You're so materialistic or greedy or whatever. Contempt is this idea that you don't see your person as a good person anymore. Like Mm, at the end of the day, we should all think our person is a good person in their soul. And I think contempt is just, I don't like who you are. Defensiveness is that there's no accountability, that as soon as a fight happens, we're thinking about what else we can say. Have you seen any of Nate Bargatze's stand up?
No,
Oh,
no.
his are
I have to check it out.
hilarious. Yeah, he had one recently where he was, like, talking sorry, you might need to cut this out, it's gonna be long-winded, but it's, he was talking about how he realized one day that, like, every man he knew in his life had never done his own laundry, And so he was like, "Well, I do my own laundry. I'm gonna use that as a way to argue when I'm losing a fight with my wife." So he just sat on it for weeks, and then they're fighting about something completely unrelated. He's like, "Well, I do my own laundry," and of course that started a new fight. And it was like a very funny. But that idea of like instead of holding accountability, you're just defensive and trying to blame the other person, and then stonewalling
Yeah,
is like shutting down.
shutting down. It's interesting, and I wonder, like, how much, financial stress plays into some of these things. And I think that for so long, I know that in my parents' divorce, finances were an issue.
Yeah.
Career was an issue, finance was an issue, and it was so much of it was different money scripts. My mom was more money vigilant and for sure money worship, and my father was money avoidant. And
Mm,
and the intersection of that was just chaos, and
it's painful.
it was not fun, and I
And you
saw the
overlay,
fights.
yeah.
Go ahead.
And you overlay some of the gender research out there that, men and women are socialized differently around money. And there's some interesting things around how much, in a hetero couple, how much a woman makes is like a U shape with happiness for their husband. So if the woman
Oh,
doesn't make
wow.
any money, there tends to be a little bit of unhappiness because of financial stress. And as she starts making more money, they get happier and happier until she makes 60% of his income. And then the unhappiness goes up and up again as she makes more.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
That's
fascinating. And of
so
course, it'll
interesting.
change over time as gender norms aren't as restrictive, but back then it would have been harder to.
Well, and it's interesting too, and, in my marriage, my wife makes way more than I do. And
Yeah.
and it's like, um and it's interesting that one of the things that I notice is that I'm gonna rephrase that because she'll get pissed at me if I say it that way. In some in some relationships, you get one person that makes more than another. And what you see is there's also a power dynamic, that an
Yes.
imbalance in the power dynamic, that, you know, or a power play that is a person might hold things back and not say them because they feel like, oh, is that going to get called up? Is that
Right.
money going to get played up? So it's interesting too, like whoever's making more or making less, whoever's making more will always have a degree of power over the other person. And,
Right.
and that's not fun.
No, no, for either party too, it's wild, and the gender stuff is fascinating and, yeah, unique, and it kind of, like I think what it is that we're kind of hinting on and not talking about, but we don't have to, but is that, like, in those situations, that it's assuming, like, joint ownership over the funds, and not every couple is like that,
Yeah.
I'm fascinated, like, I don't believe in ever telling someone how to do anything with their money. I feel like we are the experts in our own lives. And so we can give advice. We can say, here's what research suggests, or here's what I've seen anecdotally. But we can't tell anybody what they're doing is right or wrong. That's up to
Right.
them to decide what's right. But with couples, I'm always shocked when there's completely separate finances. I'm like, what are you going to do if one person runs out of money? Are you going to be like, I'll see you after my Europe trip, enjoy your cat food? Like, what do these couples expect to do when they're totally separate? And so I'm always fascinated because the research around joint accounts is pretty strong that joint accounts do have higher quality of relationship, less like of separation and things like that. Um, that is interesting when there's a choice to keep separate. And it's not just I'm too busy to combine it, but a choice that we need to stay separate. I'm always curious about the why, because I think the why is a more important conversation than actually putting together the accounts or not.
It's really interesting. And I have never really thought about that. And it's really interesting because, and I think in so many things, the coming back to one thing you tapped on there, the why. I think so often in relationships or in anything we do, there's a why that might not be getting talked about. I want to save. Why do you want to save? Well,
Yes.
I want to spend more. Well, why do you want to spend more? And we don't talk about our whys. And like and why is such an important thing. I love Simon
And
Sinek's
so
book,
often
Start
we
with
don't
Why.
even know our own why is. That's the
Yeah.
hardest part. Like To unpack okay, so, like, this is a dumb example, but when I was a young person, I paid for all my school. I was in school for 100 years with waitressing, right? And so I always had, like, bags of Crown Royal is where I put my tips in, and it lost my whole bag of tips. It was probably only, like, $70, but it destroyed me and made me eat, like, ramen for, like, 2 weeks straight. Like, it really did mess me up losing this money, and I realized, like, 15 years later that every time I had cash, I spent it. I gave it away. I used it immediately because I was so scared to lose money. And like for
Mhm.
15 years, I had not put that connection together. I didn't know my why because it was so subverted by all these other things. And so it's so powerful for us to discover our whys behind our actions rather than just criticizing ourselves or feeling shameful of our actions.
It's so true. And I think that like you're saying here is we don't know why we're doing a lot of what we do. You know, they said I was reading this study and I'm gonna slaughter, but it was a large percentage of what we do is completely on autopilot. There's just so much of our day that we're doing and it's
Yes.
so much of it's on autopilot.
Like the
And the
Malcolm
conscious
Gladwell stuff, the unconscious blinking. Oh, yeah, I love his work. Yeah.
right? And then like the reality is as we start to try to make this stuff conscious, we are going to see some things there that are like, wow, wow, I didn't know about that. Yeah, I didn't see that
Yeah.
what was going on there. And I think that so much of it's stored in just in our body that we're not aware of, you know, whether that be a trauma or I've had this interesting experience where I've, you know, studying alternative medicine, uh, kind of off topic for money, but I don't think it is. Um, I was doing yoga once and I've had clients talk to me about this too. And they suddenly had this memory pop up while they're
Mm,
leaning into a pose. And they're like, I had this memory of like when I was a kid and this thing happened. And I was just like, well, you're getting to something there. There's something
yeah.
underneath the surface. And I
Oh,
think that with money, we have because again, we talk about money, but it's not about money because it's never been about money. It's about our founding experiences, you know? Uh, I remember when I was a kid and my uncle, the really wealthy uncle, my Uncle Ian, left his wallet. And it wasn't his wallet. It was his money clip. And this was back in the day before ATMs and stuff. And he
yeah.
had come to visit us and driving a long way. And I think that in his money clip, he had about $10,000.
Wow.
And I found it and I was just like, you know,
Yeah.
like the lights just like, yes.
Like the
Because
blank check.
right? In my mind, this was now my money. And I was just like, and then I was like, look what I found, Dad and Mom. Were like, oh. And they called him on his old school cell phone. And, you know, it was like one of those first cell phones at that time, a big old car thing. And he
Yeah.
came back and got his money. And I was devastated that this money that was going to be, I don't remember a lot of things from that time in my childhood. But
Yeah.
I remember that as clear as day. I can still see that money clip. I can see where it was at. So if anyone wants to tell me that that's not a core memory, and I don't know
Yeah.
what it's affecting in other areas, but I remember that when other stuff wasn't remembered. So,
Right.
you know,
And
there's
like
these little things.
yeah, Brad Clowns call them like flashpoint memories. These are a memory that imprints on your memories for so long and how it shapes our unconscious beliefs. And I think unpacking it can be really fun. He and his co-authors Rick Taylor and his father Ted Clowns created this money egg exercise that's really fun, where you're supposed to use your non-dominant hands. If you're right-handed, you use your left hand, and you just sketch out all the money memories you can remember memories of receiving, of earning, of losing or finding or of stealing or overspending or buyer's remorse or watching conflict around money or seeing power around money. And so you're supposed to just sketch them all out and then afterwards kind of describe what emotions come up for each and then kind of figure out where these memories kind of tie into a story. And it's so fun, like over the course, one of my, like, flexes, I guess, or my truths and a lie I like is that I was the first certified financial therapist in the world. And so I ate this
That's rad.
stuff up. Yeah, it was really cool. But as soon as I found out that this developing field of financial therapy exists, I was in every conference, every training I could get into. So I've done my money egg probably like 6 to 8 times over the years. And each time new memories of money would take hold, new memories I didn't think about or were pushed down, or our memories aren't tied very chronologically. They're tied by emotion. So maybe I was in a great mood one day and my money egg would have more empowering, more powerful, more fun memories of money. Maybe I was sad another day and all these sad memories would pop up to the front. But either way, my money egg transformed over time. And so I think it's fascinating for people to dig into and jot down or write down or draw out all the money memories they can think about and think about, what does this mean for my money story?
Well, let me ask you another question here. Um, Say someone is starting to look at some of their money stories and they don't like the money story they have. They're money avoidant and they don't want to be money avoidant. And, they want to, and I mean, and I know money vigilant, each of them has their strengths and weaknesses, but, say they want to be a little bit more money vigilant so they could
Yeah.
save. How can they start changing these scripts when there's so much on top?
I love it, and I think to hearken to Brene Brown's work, she talks about how there's a difference between guilt and shame, right? Guilt is when we do something wrong, we should feel a little bad so that we don't do it again. But shame is this like intrinsic feeling of badness. So when it comes to our money scripts, if you're having a lot of shame where you think I'm bad, it's going to hold you back because, like you said, every script has to have some strengths and some weaknesses. And so I think by embracing yourself and stopping the shame, you can move towards more of a middle ground. Because what our hope is that you're a little bit of every script that you get. You don't give away
Yeah.
all your money avoidant. That you save the parts that are caring of others, of not being overly confident in making mistakes with finances, of not being hyper focused on financial wealth accumulation. It's these like little baby steps. I also, speaking just about money avoidant now, is that I think that so often we rely on motivation to change our behaviors, where there can be great little behavioral nudges or automatic things integrated in, so you don't have to rely on a nudge. So for me, I didn't like I didn't like tracking my spendings, and I had to get an app that had like bells and whistles that would go off every time I was overspending in a category or underspending in a category, so that I could kind of see it. I also needed, like, separate accounts so that I only had to manage a small amount of money, so my paycheck actually goes to one account that's for bills, one account that's for my financial goals, one account for my actual day-to-day spending, so I only have to manage a small amount of money, and it gets less overwhelming. So what I'm trying to say is that you don't have to do everything based on motivation. You can do some things on just, like, small nudges that make you do the right thing. Um and like that paycheck is an example, or naming your account certain things is another example. Um,
I love that.
and I think, yeah,
No, no, I love the naming your account certain things because for me, Wells Fargo used to have this feature where you could change and give all your accounts nicknames, and they don't seem to
yeah.
have it in the app anymore.
Oh
I can't find it,
no.
and I used to like sit there and go like, Sean's superhero account, Sean. It was more fun for me because I was like, oh,
Yeah,
these have a little bit of character to them, and it was gamified to a degree, and that was
yeah,
awesome. And I think that even if it's just a nickname that you give it yourself, this is a great way to kind of make this fun. I mean,
yeah.
we make other things fun. Like your sons, you said were playing Fortnite,
The girls, the daughters,
the
yeah.
girl, forgive me. That's awesome. My daughter is a gamer too, so that's rad.
Yes.
My daughter, it just binges Minecraft
There's
and
so much skippity toilet going on in my living room right now.
there
Lots
you
of
go.
Ohios. I don't even know what else they're talking about.
Right? Oh, Gen Alpha in there. Do you know mewing? This is one
Yes.
that I
Oh my gosh. Maybe if we have time at the end, I'll get my 8-year-old to come in because she mews better than everybody. She is
oh
very
my
funny
goodness.
about it.
My daughter turned around and she's like, "Daddy." And I was like, "What are you doing? What are you doing right here right now?" But
Yes.
it's crazy because I have to then try to teach this little person about finance, and
I
I have
know.
no idea how to do it.
Yes, I love this.
How do you go about teaching your daughters about money?
I make so many mistakes, but luckily, the more I do, the more the mistakes get, like, smaller. Like, my funniest story is that, like, years after I started teaching, money and relationships is one of the classes I teach where it centers a lot about how to talk to your kids about money because secrecy is so bad for kids, and I wouldn't mind coming back to that later. But anyway, years afterwards, I'm, like, telling people, "Talk to your kids about money," and we're in the car, and my oldest is about 7 at the time, and she's like, "Mom, how much money do you have?" And, like, all the color rushed out of my face. I, like, started sweating, and I was like, "All the well, how much money do I have? What does this mean?" And so I go into the longest story ever about how I have money in accounts for different reasons. I'm saving for your college, I'm saving for emergencies, I'm saving like, here are my goals, and it was, like, a half an hour later, and I finally took a breath after, like, just rambling. She goes, "Is that enough to get me Pokemon cards?" Before I went into this half an hour monologue, I should have asked, "What are you curious about when you ask that? What do you are you is this coming from a place of like being worried or are you curious or what do you want to learn about?" Like and instead I took my stuff around money and let it
Right.
dictate. And so,
Right.
like, the best piece of advice for parents is that, like, taking a deep breath and being curious about what they're wanting to know, because oftentimes they'll tell you. Sometimes they'll say, "I'm worried that you're stressed about money," or "I'm worried because I heard so and so's dad lost their job." It could be something very specific. So be curious about what they want to know and make sure that you're not emotionally over aroused like I did in that situation. Um, l- yeah, can I go back to the secrecy around money
Please
though?
do. I was gonna
Okay.
ask, yeah, I was just gonna ask you about that, so we
Good.
could
Okay.
get to it.
There's some really, really interesting research around how secrecy and avoidance around money is actually the problem rather than saying the wrong thing around money. So there was a great book called Nurture Shock that came out years ago. It's kind of Freakonomics for child rearing, talking about what are some of our assumptions around children's upbringing that may be incorrect. And one of them was in the 90s, it became very big focus to not fight in front of your children, right? Like Oprah and all the other daytime hosts were like, don't fight in front of your children. So a group of researchers listed these families and said, do you promise to not fight in front of your kids for 10 years? Like, not a single argument, not a single fight for 10 years, right? You'll get this huge incentive or whatever. So they did it. And so in 10 years, the researcher interviewed the children and we're like, this can be so fun to hear about how awesome they were. And that's not what they found. They found children that were highly anxious and lacking conflict resolution skills. They would see the tension start with their parents and they didn't get a chance to see the resolution, right? They only saw the tension and then nothingness, right? So they didn't learn the skills. They didn't have the idea of like, what happened? Are they okay? And so they were constantly living with this fear that the fight was what's it called? Unresolved. And the same thing
Wow.
with children with money. If we don't talk about money, it becomes secreted and they fill in the blanks inappropriately. So the more we mess up, the more conversations we have that's we say dumb things or they are confused, the more we have, the more we let them help us fill in their blank spots.
I'm gonna be a little bit vulnerable here and share something really funny in a way. Um, so I grew up with a very conservative father, and my mom was pretty much middle of the road, but my father was quite conservative. And
Yeah.
13 years old rolled around, and it was the time to talk about boys and girls and stuff like that. And, I was starting to hear things from friends. So my dad came in one day and he was like, go to your room. There's something there for you. And I was like, this is really enigmatic. I was like, what's happening right here, right now? And I get in the room and it was this conservative Christian book on puberty and told you all these things. And it was very much like some of the things. It's like, if you think about a woman too much, this is a sin, and it's like, if someone
Yeah.
touches themselves, this is a sin. And I'm like, and it was
Yes.
just like, it was this approach. And it was like, and then so it was like, there was such a level of secrecy in my house around
Yes.
this.
And
It
restriction and like
and
forbiddenness.
restriction, and then it just left me feeling so, like, terrified inside, and finally, luckily, I had a best friend in Micah. My friend Micah, and Micah's like, "Sean, he saw the book when he came to my house once, and he's like, "This is crap." He's like, "I got older brothers. My dad talked to us. My older brothers talked to us." And he pulled me aside. He's like, "This is what you need to know." And I mean, luckily it was, but it still wasn't like great information, but it was sure as heck better than what this book was telling me. And it was interesting because there was shame, there was fear, and all of that was made worse by the secrecy. The secrecy around all of this made it really terrifying. And so if I can tell people anything, it's like you're saying, is just don't hide behind
Don't hide, yeah. And if you
this
don't know where
stuff.
to start, there are some great, like, first steps. Like, do you do, like, show notes at the end? Um Well, hopefully people can Google it, but there's like an
Yeah,
organization that actually has like a know as you grow, and it talks about like what you should talk to your children at each different age group. So if you're
that's
like, I don't
great.
even know where to start with my 5-year-old, here is a topic like wants versus needs that you can talk about, and it has little like starting points, right? Um, there's some great books. Like my friend has Milton the Money Dog, which is like a fun kids book to read. I think it's Milton the
That's
Money
awesome.
Savvy Pup. So there's like, if you don't know where to start, there are starting points, but it doesn't matter where you start. The matters like just like your money story, like it's never too late to change your scripts. It's never too late to have a different relationship with your money, and it's never too late to start talking to your kids about money.
I love that. I'm writing a book for kids,
Oh,
not children, little children, like more
yeah.
like tweens, more like your
Oh,
daughters. It sounds like,
yeah.
and my daughter's 8,
Put
but
Ohio in it then because like
oh,
that
it's
is
super
important.
Ohio. Yeah. Um, I'm writing, you're going to get a kick out of this. And I'm writing it by doing a series of talks on my podcast for each chapter. And then I
Ah,
will take the transcripts and I'm condensing them down, and then I'll have a book. And
I
I'll,
love it.
obviously go through and edit it. Talking about finance, personal finance in the zombie apocalypse. All referenced for kids talking about. And so the
Oh,
main
I love
character is my
it.
daughter, and she's in the zombie apocalypse. And so like the first chapter was needs versus wants. The second chapter was the idea of budgeting and knowing what supplies you have in the zombie apocalypse.
Oh, I
And
love
so
it.
it's awesome. And I outlined all these different chapters to look at that, because if you can make it fun and you can make it interesting, people are going to stick around and read it.
Right. And it'll seem like if you can do it in a zombie apocalypse, it's not going to be hard to do in today's society. You know what I mean? Like
Right?
it's not rocket
Right.
science. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I figured out compounding. I've got this great one for compounding interest with eggs. And
Oh.
like, if you're going out scavenging, you find 2 chicken eggs. Well, you decide that you're not going to eat them because you're going to save them and hold on to them. And they end up hatching. So now you've got 2 chickens. Well,
Amazing.
and then your chickens have some eggs and you save those eggs. But then those eggs hatch, and then suddenly you have 4 chickens, and suddenly, wow, all of a sudden you've got 8 eggs. And like, okay, well, now I can eat one, but I'm going to let the rest of them go. And then suddenly your 4 chickens turns into 7 chickens. And then suddenly you have 14 eggs. And suddenly it just starts growing exponentially. And when I explained it that way to my daughter about, okay, you put money in and it starts growing like these eggs, my daughter's like, that's amazing. So you mean after a certain amount of time, my like money could turn into like this giant thing? I was like, yep, if you have enough time. Just like with the chickens. If you want to get a bunch of chickens, you have to have time for them to grow and to have more babies. And luckily in Minecraft, you can like farm animals by putting
Yeah.
pairs of them together. And she's like, that's just like Minecraft. If I put all these things. And so it was
I
great. And
love
I
it.
was just like, suddenly a concept that took me until I was like college age to learn and figure out what is compounding interest. I was able to explain to her with a bunch of eggs and chickens. And it's like, why can't we do that more often for kids?
No, I know. And make it fun and interesting and not
Fun.
about wealth accumulation, but like just about being able to meet your dream, just being able to have the freedom and the power of dictating your life. Like that's what money at the end of the day is.
Yep. That financial freedom. I was talking about we were watching Harry Potter. We love Harry Potter and Star Wars and stuff in my family. And we were talking about Emma Watson, Hermione Granger. And my daughter's like, "Well, she's not acting much anymore." And I was like, and I looked at her and I was like, "She doesn't have to." She's
Yeah.
like, "Why not?" I was like, "Because she played Hermione Granger in the original Harry Potter series, and she never has to work again if she doesn't want to." And my
Right.
daughter's like, "What? Why would she not want to act?" And I said, "Because she can do whatever she wants. She has financial freedom."
And she
And
probably
that's the
does
beauty.
act, but she picks movies that she wants to do, that she doesn't care who gets to see it, the
100%.
art. Yeah.
Whatever she wants, because she has that freedom. And if we can teach our kids how to aspire to that, it's even better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me ask you this. If you could go back in time and give yourself one bit of financial advice, what would it be?
Uh, so I have a real tangible one because I went to a very expensive private graduate school, and I wish I had not done that. But I think in general is to be kinder to myself. I am a firstborn daughter, and I tend to be very self-critical. And so I wish I had been a little bit more kind to myself. It's probably my biggest piece of advice.
We're all on a journey on this giant planet, hurtling through space. I think the best thing any of us can do is to be kind with ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.